Welcome back to Building a Fighter. My name is Dr. Austin Shane, sports chiropractor in Scottsdale, Arizona. With me, as always, badass strength coach in Denver, Colorado, Alex Friedman. What I do?
What's up? How are you doing, man?
Good, dude. It's a beautiful Sunday morning. Drinking my coffee, having a little sparkling water from Trader Joe's, the lime variety, and
I I dare you to put them together.
it's not gonna happen. Not a fucking chance. I don't do bubbly coffee.
It's like what an atrocious combination.
Today, we're going to be talking about the difference between individualized training sessions and team training sessions. And we're going to bring it to the entire spectrum, not just strength and conditioning, but everything in general. So, Alex, I want you to talk about your experience because you have a different experience than me in the strength conditioning, where you do a lot of teamwork.
Right. Within kind of my context at Factory X and my boy toy, we treat the professional fight team. It's to me, it's almost like a next level, like college wrestling team. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of autonomy within you and yourself being a fighter, but there's also team practices you have to attend every day. There's like mandatory strength and conditioning. There's like accountability factors and a huge emphasis on the team and kind of family feel. Right. So when we talk about strength and conditioning, particularly when we talk about group settings, I think there's absolutely a time and place, both for cost effectiveness, for like general adaptation. Like we talk all the time about MMA athletes being, markedly untrained in the weight room.
Yep.
A group class is perfect for that, right? Like we're going to give you the basics and give you time to rep shit out at a relatively low cost to you, right? Because if we're learning the mechanics of a squat in a one-on-one session, I could perhaps give you a little better like feedback and individualized approach, but you're going to get much of the same instruction as if I'm teaching a 8 to 10 people how to squat, right? So I think there's a time and place for that. I do think there's a time and place to specify and individualize as well, right? I think that's a valid approach too, but um, the group classes I think hold a lot of utility in strength conditioning, in team practice, in a lot of general capacities. That being said, they're not all that you can do.
Right, and for me, what I normally do, and then the gym I work mostly with, which is Fight Ready, it's a lot more of an individualized approach. Right, there is a team there, but a lot of it is on the athlete to figure out their what schedule works for them. While there is team practices, right, but it's if you want individual training, you're going to get that on your own. If you want strength conditioning, you're going to find what fits your schedule. Right, it's you have a little bit more autonomy, which, like Alex said, there's pros and cons, right? It's kind of what I talked about in my video with online training, right? This type of setup works really well if you're a self-starter. If you're going out there and you're already pretty good but you want to become elite, this is a really good setup because it allows you to focus on individual needs that you may not be getting addressed in those group classes. But for the majority of beginners or the majority of people that are looking to get good, I believe the team setup is one of the best ways to do that because you got to put your hours in, you got to put your time in, you got to be able to learn what you don't know before you start to sharpen the tool, if you will.
Now, I will say like there's a little bit of a catch to that with the team setup, right? Because it is great for the beginners and the amateurs and um, being able to start your career. Like you get high level practice partners, you get introduced to like a performance schedule, you get a lot of these take it for granted things just kind of supplied to you as like team requirements, right? I think it becomes increasingly easy to get stuck there,
Right.
right?
No,
Because
I completely agree.
right, you said like,
Yeah.
and the guys that have success on our team are the self starters, right? Like we can't replace that. That's not a thing that goes away just because you take like a team primary approach or
Right.
whatever.
Pause for a second. The guys that are successful anywhere are
Yeah,
the self starters. Like
amen.
those are the
Yeah,
people that are successful in MMA no matter what.
right. And so, like I said, with the team thing, it like becomes almost a trap. Like you can rely on the team, but then you start relying on it too much, and it's like, oh, I don't have to take anything myself,
Yep.
which is a fallacy in itself. So we do have a couple guys like that on the team that rely on the team trainings almost exclusively, and that's like quite honestly the reason they've been stuck at a amateur regional pro level for 5 6 years.
Yeah, they get good, not great, right? It's a
Yeah.
concept that I'm obsessed with. Is how do you go from good to great? That's always been Alex has heard me ad nauseum talk about this
Oh
since
yeah.
since UW lacrosse, right? It's
Yep.
a concept that is I hold near and dear, and one of the best ways to go from good to great is to figure out what your individual deficiencies are once you have a base level of competency.
Yeah.
It's being self aware and then putting yourself in a situation to raise those floors where you have those deficiencies, right?
Well, I think and there's a nuance to that too, right? Like being self-aware doesn't just mean like I know myself and what I'm strong and bad at, right? I think it's more I'm going to go ask for feedback and not ask for feedback, for necessarily the coach's sake, right? A lot of times I
Yeah,
feel like
dude,
people
that's
do
the
ask
worst.
ask feedback so that coach thinks I'm involved or so that I can know what the coach thinks. It's got to be I'm asking for feedback so I can give myself a better awareness. And maybe I disagree, maybe I agree with some of the feedback when I look at it critically and apply it to myself, right? And so I think that's a really big nuance that counts a lot. Am I asking for feedback for external reasons or for internal reasons to grow, right? And so that feedback comes and you can become self-aware. It's hard to be really self-aware just in a practice, right?
Dude,
Like, yeah, I'm losing goes, right? It's hard to like point, this is the exact reason I'm losing goes.
right. That's one of my biggest pet peeves as a coach is
Yeah.
like I've been listening to I don't know if you guys at home know what masterclass is, but I've been diving deep into masterclass. That's been my current thing that how I like to educate myself. And I've been listening to a video from Michael Lewis, who made Moneyball, Blindside, all these different things on how to tell a story. Because that's another thing that's a passion of mine is how do I get my message out there in a story format? And he said a pretty powerful quote when he's like, when he's interviewing somebody, those people tell him when he's asked the right questions. He can see it on their face when he asks the right questions.
Hmm.
Now, the opposite is 100% true. When an athlete asks me a question and I know they're asking it for me, not for them, I know that 1,000 times. Don't think you're slick. Don't think you're trying to, like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm a good at, like, oh, I'm doing the right thing. It's not about doing the right thing, it's about doing what's best for you. And you don't have to appease anybody. And that's one of those things where that is a trap that a lot of athletes that get stuck in that team system fall into, where they start to look at the coaches as like it's almost like father figures to a point
Right.
where like, oh, I have to appease the father figure up top, and they're going to ask these questions not for themselves to get better, but because they want that validation from the person at the top. And that's a trap that's going to keep you down. That's not going to elevate you up.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's like the heart of what we call like creating dependent athletes versus independent athletes,
Hmm.
right? Like that's and you see this through coaching, and it happens a lot of times like through the subtleties of coaching. Is like I want to empower my athletes, and like you can beg the question of like what the fuck does that mean, right? But I want to give my athletes the tools that they could train themselves without me at some point. Now I think there's less utility to that because obviously I can take some off their plate and serve them in a capacity, but I want them to be at least functionally knowledgeable about what and why we're doing what we're doing, right? Because if they're not, if they're just like exclusively, I'm the soldier, I'm going to do what you ask, coach, then we're missing the boat a little bit, right? Because then there's no ownership, autonomy, and it becomes easy, like after a loss or after a fight, to like blame, right? It's like there's got to be an understanding of ownership and like, no, you're the one in the cage, you're the one doing the training sessions, like take control a little bit of your camp, right? And that's a big maturity process as a person as well as a fighter.
Well, that's a good, I mean, that's a good kind of segue to where like what I like to tell my athletes, there's a time and a place to be a soldier, and there's a time and a place to be a general, right?
Yeah.
Soldiers win battles, generals win wars. And the same concept of good to great, you can win a lot of battles as a soldier where you just go out there, you get plugged into the video game controller, and you do what your coach says. But the
Hmm.
only way to get into the top 15, the only way to get into the top 10, the only way to win the strap is to take accountability, to take ownership and be your own general because that's how you win those wars. If you got to go fight, like this is the day after Pantoja and Steve Ercik. If you want to go fight either of those motherfuckers, you got to be a general. If
Yeah.
you're going to be a soldier and you're relying on somebody else to give you strategies, they're too good at making game time decisions and making game time adaptations for anybody on the outside to be telling you what to do. You need to be telling yourself what to do, and you need to be able to adapt on the fly and have a general mindset instead of a soldier mindset, because that's what it's going to take to beat those guys.
Yeah. And I think that that can be also a pit trap. Like we've talked about kind of the pitfalls and traps of team setting training, right? I can think we can flip the script and talk a little bit about traps and pitfalls of individual type training, which is you have the grandiose ego. You are not self aware, but you're acting as if you are,
Yes.
right? Which I think is very relevant in our sport. But yeah, when you take the general hat, but you don't know how to lead the army, right?
Yeah.
Which is your support staff, your training partners, your people around you. It's like, okay, I'm going to stack. I see this. This is probably the most common one. I'm the general of my own camp. So I'm going to work out 4 times a day and spar 3 times a week. Right. And it's like, that's maybe not the path to greatness. Right. If you're at a place where you're going to be the general and you're going to take control and try and go from that good to great, like our measuring stick is no longer effort and getting tired. Our measuring stick is, are you getting better? Is better truly better? Not is more better, but
Well,
how are we sharpening
that's
the
why they're
sword?
different words. I have to say that all the time. It's like better is better, more is more. Sometimes they're synonymous, but sometimes they're not. That's why they're two separate words.
Yeah.
And like, no, I completely agree. And this is across the board, right? It's you need to learn how to follow before you learn how to lead. A lot
Yep.
of people want to be their 3-0 amateur, and they want to be the general of their own camp, right? That cannot happen. You don't even know what fighting is yet.
Yep. Yep.
Like, you know how to go into a cage and throw a right. That's probably about it. And so because of that, but because everybody wants to be great right off the bat and not go through those honestly, like the easiest way to decide this or to describe this is like I've fallen into that pitfall too. I'm relatively competent at what I do. I would like to consider myself a high performer in my field, but sometimes at the beginning of my career, I didn't have the education or I didn't have the experience to really command that generalship, right? I didn't have the
Hmm.
experience to be the general yet. I'm at the point in my career now that I do. And
Yeah.
I look back on at the like my first year of doing my stuff, and I'm like, oh, there's a reason why I wasn't getting the buy-in that I was looking to get. There's a reason why I wasn't getting followed because I didn't know how to follow yet.
Yeah.
Once you learn how to follow, you can figure out how to lead. And then you get everything goes up from there, but you cannot rush that process. I tried. It's hard, right? And
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with wanting to be that general right away.
Yeah. If you don't, then that's more of a problem than if you
Right,
do.
exactly. If you don't want to be a general right away, that's a problem because that
Yep.
means you don't want to be elite.
Yep.
This is a problem of people that want to be elite, but they try to rush the process.
Well,
Unfortunately for everybody, it is a process. It can't just be a 0 to 100.
Well, and I think that's a really good analogy for a couple reasons. I think we can go into a little bit like the business side of fighting too, right? Like when you are starting your amateur career, when you're trying to be an athlete, in this mixed martial arts landscape, you have to look at this as I'm starting my own business, right? Because if you don't, then you're going to be marched in one direction and, for lack of a better term, manipulated in certain other directions on the business side, right? And on the contracts and this and that. So you got to be a little bit smarter about how you're navigating those waters. Now, if you can find people that you trust and follow them initially, like Austin said, I'm all for that, right? But if we don't have the perspective of I'm starting a business and I got to make this work in multiple maturity regards and not just in the fighting regard, then I think we're missing the ball a little bit, right? Because then you might be taking the wrong fights, you might be listening to the wrong management, you might this and that. It's like we have to take those critical steps of looking at my career from a like 10,000-foot view. Okay, look at what's my management, what's my fights look like, what's my training look like, who is the people around me. We manage that on the self-starter thing, and then we accept the role of being a follower. Because
Yep.
like you, Austin, right? When we start our business in strength and conditioning and in healthcare, it's like, I want to be the fucking man. I want to do my own business, right? There's problems with that. And then you
Mhm.
grow into it and now there's not problems with that. So it's the literal definition of growing pains, right?
Exactly. You have to start somewhere, right? But just because you start somewhere doesn't mean you're already at 100%. And that's
Right.
what a lot of people don't realize. And that's a struggle that I went through. That's something I didn't realize.
Well, and it's cool too because it like parallels literal martial arts journey, right?
Yep.
In a microcosm. You start as a white belt where you're at class and you're actively participating, literally just trying to get better. Okay, and then you progress through the ranks and like you've faced different adversities here. Now it's competition. Now are you winning competition? How do you handle competition? Okay, you get to be a brown belt. It's like, can you teach back? Can you coach? Can you give back? Right. And then by the time you're a black belt, it's not just are you motherfucker going to submit people? It's can you be a leader? Can you have,
Hmm.
the
Are you a
morals
good
and
example?
right. And so it's a microcosm in martial arts that parallels to your fighting career or your business stature. Right.
Yep.
And there's a community aspect to that, but there's also an individual aspect to that of like, what do I have to do to make sure the culture and the family around me is being fed and is nurtured and growing in a positive way? But also, how the fuck am I taking care of myself? Because if I'm not taking care of myself, I can't show up for those people, which is like a life problem, not just a fighting problem.
That is the hardest part right there. It's like, and I haven't found that one out.
Oh
To be
yeah, I
completely
totally
honest,
agree.
everybody at home, like I don't know how to take care of my. I only help other people. Like I,
Yeah,
I I'm really bad at helping myself, and unfortunately, that's typically the last thing that comes, right? Because in our field, me and Alex's field, it's not if you're still trying to make it about you as a coach, you fucked up. Like honestly,
yeah,
you're a shitty coach. I hate to say that, but you already had your time. If you were still a fighter, it could be about you. If you were still a wrestler, it could be about you. But if you're on the coaching side, if you're on the support side, there's a reason why it's called support professions because you are supporting the other person getting to their goals. It's not about you anymore. And unfortunately, in a support field, typically those people take care of themselves last. And that's something that I struggle with daily. I'm figuring out how do I support myself still, but it's a part of the journey. It's a
yeah,
part of learning how to get to that next step of elite. That's really the last step of becoming elite is how can you help as many people as possible while also filling up your own cup.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean it's like the most elusive thing to think about is like a balanced lifestyle, and so and balance, quite honestly, doesn't correlate very well with greatness, right? That's
Yeah,
something you've
balance.
talked about
Yeah,
at yeah,
balance is
ad nauseum.
balance never makes greatness. I hate to break it to anybody else out there.
So as we dive into that, what's a good balance in your book, Austin, of team training to individual training, where
Yeah.
and when, and like how do you view where, or excuse me, how an athlete makes that decision?
My general idea on this is when you're young or when you're starting mixed martial arts, it doesn't have to be young in age, but no matter who you are, if you're young in age, you should start in a team setting.
Yeah,
Because what Alex was talking about, the one thing we haven't hit on the team setting is structure.
yeah,
One of the best things you can get from being a part of a team is understanding what a winning structure is and understanding the dedication and actually putting effort into everything and having to be accountable to show up to practice and having people text you if you're not at practice, hey brother, where the fuck are you, right? That is an
yeah,
extremely valuable part of being on a team setting. Okay,
yeah.
so starting your career, whether you're young or old, or if you're young and you're already elite, that needs to be in a team setting. If we're going into the what
Can I say something about that real
yeah,
quick?
yeah.
Yeah. I just have a little tidbit from my own wrestling experience that I think could help. Like if you have a younger wrestler in your wings, one of the biggest things that kind of propelled my wrestling career was, those like week long intensive camps you go to over the summertime or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
like, Perler, J Rob, whatever it was or is nowadays. Um, my coach says something that sticks with me to this day is like, all they're doing in those camps is teaching you how to train.
Yep.
They're not necessarily giving you great technique or good experience or this or that. They're putting a schedule forth that seems really elite and intense, but that's what the elite and intense people do for their whole training year. Right. So it's giving you a structure. It's a little like peek behind the curtain of like, this is how you should train if you want to be a motherfucker.
Yep.
Right. And I forget which camp I went to. I mean, you've gone to a million camps, but one of those camps I went to is like, okay, this is a training schedule that I need to maintain. And then I did that throughout my high school career. So I think that's a good look into it if you're like a youth wrestler or a high school wrestler that's like, okay, what the fuck does a good training schedule look like? Maybe you steal from some of those camps and plug and play where you can.
Well, that's why, like, obviously, I've talked about my childhood with wrestling on here a little bit, and it's some people would think it was a little bit bordering on like a little bit sketchy. where I grew up wrestling at. Like it was more like kind of like a wrestling military academy. But the
Hmm.
one thing that I'll always respect Hector Gomez for, who's still like a second dad to me, is he showed me how to be. He gave us the blueprint to be great.
Yeah.
He showed us that even if we took it too far sometimes on the training side, this is what it takes to get to your goals. And no matter what, you can accomplish that. Like since I was 10, I wrestled 7 days a week for 2 to 3 hours a day. And at the end of every practice, we did 10 rope climbs with our fucking feet dangling. And sometimes we would get I mean, this is probably a bad story to be on the internet, but like sometimes if you had a bad practice, you end up doing 1,000 push-ups. Sometimes if you have a bad practice, you get dropped off when you're 13 years old, 5 miles away from the gym in the dark and have to run home. Sometimes you get screamed at and shoes thrown at you. But guess what? It made me want to be better. And that doesn't work for everybody. I understand that. But it
Yep.
allowed me to understand what structure was. In my brain, that's what worked for me. It allowed me to be the person the number one person I can equate to why I am who I am is probably Hector Gomez, because he allowed me to figure out how I could be great and the structure it took for me to get to the next level and how
Yep.
hard I actually could push myself. Because that
Hmm.
motherfucker pushed me. Like that motherfucker pushed me hard. But there's a reason why I did 10 and a half years of school in 6.5 years. Like
Yep.
it's because he showed me that I could do that. He showed me that I could put my brain and my body through that and be okay. So
Well,
that's one of those things that like that team structure that I had, where it wasn't just me that he was doing that to. That was anybody at Gomez Wrestling Academy. That allowed us, all of us, to go accomplish great things. We had guys who went to Stanford. I mean, fuck, 3 years ago we had three different of 10 weight classes. Three of them were national champions from Gomez Wrestling Academy. Like it's fucking cool to see, but it allows you to see how hard you can push yourself, and that's what a good team does.
yeah, good structure, right? And then you steal that and for your own personal use, right? You like that's your blueprint or that's your like starting off point or jumping off point when it is time to transition to a little bit more of the individual type setting.
Yep, exactly. And that individual type setting, once you have that structure, that's where you can go from the cook to the chef. That's where you can figure out, okay, I know that I can work really fucking hard. Now, how do I work smart? How do I get to the next level and be as efficient as possible in this system that I'm developing for myself? And like continuing to talk about my journey because it's easier to relate to, going from like high school wrestling or kids wrestling or even college wrestling and then into Cairo school. That's where I got to adjust my own schedule where, okay, I know how to work really, really hard, but harder isn't always better. We already talked about that. That's why they're separate words. So, how do I actually become better? And that's where I can fine tune my process into, hey, I was able to kind of do really well through a doctorate and a master's program at the same fucking time without spending extra energy on it. I was able I was able to be a strength coach and a wrestling coach at a gym while I'm doing two graduate degrees at the same time, because one of the things that being on a good team shows you how to do is time management. If you're working that hard all the time, you have to be extremely efficient as what you're doing, right? That showed me how hard I can go, but also how efficient I had to be. And now that I have that understanding of efficiency, okay, now I can reel it back of, all right, I know exactly how much effort, no more, no less, an easy way to say it, minimal effective dose. I know exactly how much effort I need to put into something to get the desired result. That's it. And I don't need to go over that because then I could have my effort be going somewhere else and accomplishing a different goal. Or I could have my effort going into something else and helping somebody else out, right? Which I did a lot in
Hmm.
Cairo school. Like a lot of what I did that helped me be relatively successful now is it wasn't just about me. That individualized approach that I was able to come up with based off being able to know how hard I had to push to get where I needed to be allowed me to then go help others. And with being able to help others, I got to help myself because I got to learn through their struggles and figure out what they weren't doing or the problems they had, which then allowed me to already be able to overcome them if they ever popped up in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the way that I'm kind of conceptualizing this as I listen to you kind of describe the transition that you go through from the team atmosphere to more of an individual atmosphere is like it's a lot like the like yin and yang circle, right? Like when you're in the team atmosphere, let's just say the team is the white portion. You still got to sprinkle in those private trainings, those individual things that like, okay, I'm having trouble in this exact situation. Let me grab a coach, see if I can do a 30-minute, 60-minute drilling session, figure it out, right? Like you have that big team setting, you have a little bit of sprinkle individualization, and then you slowly blend into the more of the black section, which is now majority is individual, but we still sprinkle in the team sessions are like when we need practice partners, when we need a little bit more like structure or push. Like nobody can spar by themselves.
Mhm.
It's just,
Yep.
like it's a good little principle. Like you can't match the intensity of a team, like which is another kind of benefit of the team structure is that there's people there to push you 100% of the time.
Yep.
So like blending those approaches, I think, is where it becomes really, really hard to thread the needle, right? Because each individual athlete is an individual, and like those ratios are different for individual people. But then, like self awareness is such a hard, bullseye to hit, right? It's like, are you truly doing enough? Because uh, one thing I don't like when people kind of generalize off our podcast, we talk about working better, not just harder, like and
Yeah.
kind of transcending that idea that just work more, 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 more. Just because you're working better doesn't mean that it's not hard,
Yep.
right? Like
A
it's
lot of the
still
times it is.
like the hard work is like the prerequisite. That's like, do you have your white belt techniques down? Right? And it's not just because you're a black belt, those white belt techniques go away. Those white belt techniques are still just as relevant, but they're not the primary focus, right? And so I don't like that misconception that I think it comes across sometimes. Working better still includes working hard, but working hard is not the exclusive thing going on.
Exactly. Like an easy way to boil this all down for the team versus the individualized approach is working within a team allows you to find your limits, right? That's what allows you to push yourself to the nth degree. How far can you push before you break? Now we go to the individualized. All right, I know my limits. How can I be as efficient as possible within those limits? How
Yep.
can I really sharpen those limits to where I can get the most out of it? Because a lot of the times, if you're pushing to the nth degree all the time, you're just revving that engine. You're just fucking basically just sitting there wasting energy, right? How do I get the same result with less effort? That's
Yep.
what we're talking about. You need to know how far you can push before you start to scale it back and try to be efficient. Otherwise, you're always sitting at 75, 85, maybe
Yeah.
90%. If you don't know how to get to 100, you're never going to be able to get to 100.
Yeah. And I think honestly, the hardest part about this and why we're so amped up and passionate about talking to it is two reasons. One, in mixed martial arts, and especially when you're trying to compete and become a great fighter, like the results are such a dire consequence. You win, it means so much. You lose, it means even fucking more. Right. So, like, you get in all honesty, if you're not at the top, you get 3 or 4 losses before you're just written off, right? And so those consequences are so dire that I think it's really important to become that like true martial artist that is self-aware and can orchestrate this team versus individual setting. And then I think the second thing that makes it such a dire consequence is that, oh man, and I'll lose it at the tip of my tongue right now.
Well, here, while you're
Goddamn.
thinking about it, here's a
Yeah, go ahead.
easy example, right? Is what Alex is talking about with dire consequences. Say there's a fighter that he's got cut by the UFC trying to make his way back, right?
Mhm.
Why this is so fucking important is if they have their first fight back and they lose, they're 4 fights away from getting back to the UFC or to whatever major organization. That's just how it is. So those 4 fights are probably going to take about a year, maybe a year and a half to get. So that's a year to a year and a half of their life that instead of making $30,000 a fight, they're making $4,000 a fight. That's why this is so important because in a sport like MMA where money isn't plentiful, this is the difference between somebody being able to feed their fucking family and being able to or having to go get a separate job. That's
Yeah.
what this is.
Amen. Yeah.
You
So
figured out yet?
I've completely
It's
lost it.
gone
So
forever. Aaron
yeah, it's gone.
Hernandez.
It must have been a lie. Yeah, we'll give it up. That's what my mom always says. If you forgot what you're about to say, it must have been a lie.
Well,
So
hold on. Let's go technical for this individualized because I know a lot of people like to listen to our strength and conditioning stuff, right? What's a
sure.
very important part of teaching a, I guess, team setting strength and conditioning approach?
Well, I mean, I've evolved a lot in my kind of opinion on this. My first prerequisite is the atmosphere and energy has to be right. You know, like if we're in a team setting and it gets like too playful or super individualized conversations going everywhere, I don't think we're gonna get effective work done. Right. And so like setting that atmosphere, whether it's the music, your demeanor, your leadership, whatever it is, like set the atmosphere of like work is expected first, not fucking around. Right. Because I've been part of plenty of situations or like team lifts where like fucking around takes more precedent than actually getting the work done. And that's not straight up not a productive thing. Technically, when I'm in a group setting, you're trying to hit a culmination of the general necessities amongst everybody, right? And like you can identify a few common variables. They're all fighters. They all had practice this morning. They all are on this schedule generically, right? Like you can identify that and then you periodize and you kind of program for the common denominators,
Mhm.
right? You know, maybe you got like 6 flyweights and lightweight. That program is going to look different than if I have 6 light heavyweights and a middleweight, right? So you look at the group setting and you kind of create the common denominators and how can I program for this? As we get going, you can make audibles. X guy broke his pinky at practice. Y, has a plantar fasciitis in his foot. And you make those audibles and lateralizations as you go. But really allowing the athlete to know the expectations is huge. Having a solid structure and plan and like being prepared, right, is like
Mhm.
such an undervalued asset for me. Is like have your fucking station set up, right? Like it's not that hard, but it counts for a lot. It makes your transition smoother. It communicates to the athletes, I'm here to get fucking shit done, not let y'all fuck around while I set up some trap bars, right? And so I guess when I look at the outset of the team training, those are kind of the variables that I really hone in on.
As far as like, I guess not just the variables, but the actual like workouts themselves. What are those? What are some of the best structures for a team workout?
I mean, I go concurrent most all the time, right? We start with some type of warm up or dynamic effort on a stretch. We go into a power block. A lot of times that involves for me throwing med balls, especially
Mhm.
in an MMA type setting. We need transverse plane power. Throwing med balls, maybe some jump rope, single leg plyometrics. I think becomes increasingly important as you get through a really try to be healthy throughout your MMA career. Then we get into our strength blocks, compound movements, supersets with a contrast, or depending where we're at, generally with like a tricep with total body work. And then we finish off with some strength endurance or just straight up endurance, right? So I guess if we're thinking about organizing our day that way, is that kind of what you're asking me?
Yep. Yep.
Sure. And so context heavy, independent, but that's kind of the general playbook, if you
Yeah.
will.
Nice. And then like I guess from my side, from like the more individual side, I one of the biggest, I guess, benefits of working on the individual side of everything is you are allowed to, I guess, connect with the athlete a lot more, right? I get to have
Yeah.
one-on-one conversations. I get to learn about their lives.
Yeah.
And I guess the best way to say it is like that gives me ammo as a coach to be able to push them in different ways. It allows me to be creative. Like one of the biggest concepts that I hold near and dear is what you say and how you say it matters. That's
Hmm.
really it's a lot more effective when I'm working on an individual side than with a team setting. In a team setting, you have to have really good general cues. All right,
Yeah.
Superman logos on your chest, get tall, like shoot your hips through, shoot your butt back like you're trying to close a car door with your butt, right? All these
Well,
different cues that apply to a broad spectrum of people.
yeah, and I got a slight bit of hack on that I'll interrupt you for. I've always taught, and this goes all the way back to when I was teaching like group exercise with a bunch of moms. Uh, my kind of 3 areas and targeted cues with a group setting, like one, address the group, right? Give those big, broad, general cues to everybody, right? Like I'm addressing the whole group. This is what we're doing on the trap bar, like, and you create those cues that way. You give individual group cues, right? So you're like, okay, this rack, what I see from y'all is you need to be a little more stable from the ground or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You three people need to do this one thing and cue it that way. And then you sprinkle in the individual cues, all right, John, I need you to get a little more packed in your shoulders when you're going, and maybe that's a good time. But you sprinkle in between all three of those categories in the group setting, and that gives you the most effective kind of range
For
over the
sure.
group. And it makes everybody feel like they're getting talked to individually, specify group attention, and then you're commanding the group as a whole.
100%, but relatively hard to do if you have, say, a college weight room setting, right?
Yeah.
Where you have in a
That's
college,
the
say
role of being the
college
coach. Yeah.
wrestling, 25 athletes right there.
Mm-hmm.
Versus if I'm working 1-on-2 or 1-on-3 or 1-on-1, I can be like, all right, so you like anime. All right, I'll go watch whatever fucking anime because that's what I do. I'll go watch my athletes' interests, so I have a new way to connect with them, and I'll find something in what they have an interest in and connect it to whatever goal I'm trying to get out of them. So like if you like cars, right? I'm gonna go research whatever the most like if I want to increase if I basically want you to understand horsepower, I'm gonna go look up whatever fucking car is out there that has the most horsepower, and I'm going to relay that message when I'm trying to get you to sprint faster. I want you to move like a fucking McLaren, not like a Mustang, right? Something like that, where that athlete can understand it in their own context. That's the benefit of being able to work individual. That's where I can make big differences because it gets them to understand the concepts better. Something that I'm very, very passionate about is athletes that understand overperform. If they can understand what's going on and not me just throwing random science at them, but
Yep.
understanding it on their own terms, they're going to buy into the process better, which leads to better performance. Anybody that knows what's good, like it's think about it in your own terms, right? If it's something you're passionate about, you're always going to put in that extra effort. We just got to find what connects with you to figure out how can I connect the goal that I want you to accomplish with a passion of yours. If it's not lifting, like somebody we've both worked with, Julian Marquez, the amount of times that he says I fucking hate general fitness in the middle of a workout is
Yep.
astronomical. But I've found ways to communicate with him because I know what his likes, his dislikes, and his interests are. If I can figure out a way to be able to use his interests to apply that to general fitness, which is all we're doing in strength and conditioning, right? That allows him to put more into that workout. The more he puts into the workout, the more benefit he gets. The more benefit he gets, the better he looks in the cage. That's my goal as somebody that works on the individual side of training. Now, talking about like structure, from like Alex gave the good team structure for a workout. When I'm doing an individual structure for a workout, it's all going to be dependent upon what that specific athlete needs at that specific time in their specific camp. So most of what my structure looks like is I'm going to do my one-on-one assessment with them. I'm going to figure out what that athlete needs. From there, then I'm going to come up with an individualized mobility routine. Typically, I'm going to include some sort of heart rate elevation as well, and that's going to be their warm-up. So a lot of the times it's going to be something with the hips, whether it's internal, external rotation, whether it's hip flexion, whether it's hip extension. It doesn't matter, but all athletes have something to work on in their hips typically. I'm going to individualize that to them. Same with spine. Some athletes have low back extension issues. They're stuck in hyperextension of that lumbar spine. Maybe I'm going to do a lumbar flexion correction. Maybe I'm going to do thoracic rotation corrections. That's what I'm going to do and figure that out through my assessment. And then typically there's something to do with the upper extremity as well, whether it's the wrist, shoulder, or elbow. There's always something along that line that could be better, especially if they're a striking athlete. So that allows me to figure out what their deficiencies are, throw that in. And then most athletes, it's going to be some combination of a banded bike, a jump rope, a fucking walk on a treadmill, whatever it is, right? It's going to be based off of what their fight style is and how their body operates. That's their warm up. From here, I'm going to move into all of these different. From there, I'm going to move into what their first level of movement is going to be. So most of the time, it's going to be the top priority of what we're doing. For the most part, that's going to be power because I want them to be able to explode at the highest level. But sometimes, if that individual athlete, we're doing a total strength block, we're not focusing on power, then we're just starting with our fucking strength. But it's whatever their top priority is to get them to the next level. Okay. From there, we're going to work our way down in our priority list. Sometimes I'll do strength before power. I know that's a sin to some strength coaches, but again, it's if they have 100% of their battery life, I want them to be able to use as much battery as possible towards the number one goal in their training. That's it. That is the only thing I'm thinking about. And then we work our way down to, if I'm doing a concurrent model, we'll throw in our conditioning at the end, whether it's strength endurance, whether it's endurance, whether it's a density circuit, whether it's sitting on the fucking air bike, aerobic capacity work. It doesn't matter. But typically that's going to be at the end of their work because it's something that they can do that doesn't require as much mental focus as it would at the beginning of the lift. So, like aerobic capacity work, for example, you could sit on a spin bike for 30 minutes and just pedal. It doesn't take a lot up top. It just takes determination and the dedication to stay at a certain range. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I would sprinkle into, you talked about doing power after strength type of stuff. I think there's certainly a lot of contexts where if you're in a strength only block or you have a certain goal that really is negligent of power, right? Like we're out of camp, is like this dude just needs to get stronger, right? Just don't include a power block at all, right? Like
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
something I do is like if I think about it, it's back to the tier based system. Um, and you like just tier your things down, right? Like if strength is our goal, we're gonna do our first 30 minutes on strength, then we'll get maybe just some strength endurance and we'll finish with some aerobic capacity or whatever. Like power is just not part of the equation or a priority at that time and place. Right. So if you need to, like if you need some power in there to make you feel good or get your warm fuzzies, like for sure. But sometimes you can just ignore the quality outright, right? Late in camp, strength is not a priority for us.
Bingo.
Okay, we're not really going to do some camp or some strength. So it's like it is what it is in certain contexts.
Yep. 100%. And honestly, that's kind of what I got on individual versus team
Yeah.
stuff. You got anything else?
No, I think that hits it from
Sweet.
the theoretical point and then some of the tactical and technical points.
Dope. So if you guys get in touch with us, all of our information is going to be in the show notes. That's going to be our Instagrams as well as our emails. If you're looking for strength and conditioning programming, whether you're an individual, whether you're looking for a general program, or whether you're a team or a gym looking to maximize your space and try to make some money off of that weight room that you may or may not be using efficiently, we have all those programs available at buildingafighter.com. Don't forget to check us out on our TikTok, which your boy's been posting on, as well as
Oh yeah.
YouTube, because our YouTube has been popping off. That's something I'll put a lot of time into. So go subscribe to us on YouTube, and all of our podcasts are going to be in video format as well on there starting in about a month. So, as always, this is Dr. Austin Shane,
Alex Friedman.
and we are out.